invisible, always there, alone, unseen, unheard, always. Have you ever had the feeling that people only remember you when they need something? That your kindness has become synonymous with always available, and your generosity synonymous with always willing to sacrifice yourself? Have you ever wondered why it's so hard to say such a simple word, so short yet so powerful? A word of only 3 letters. No. If you've ever felt this way, tired of carrying everyone else's weight while no one carries yours, this story is for you. This isn't just a story about kindness. It's a story about boundaries, about learning that taking care of yourself isn't selfishness, it's survival. And that saying no can be the greatest act of self-love you can practice. Get ready, because what you're about to hear now might forever change the way you relate to the world. This is the story of Ricardo. He was 42 years old, with hair beginning to turn gray at the temples, kind eyes, and a smile that appeared even when he was exhausted. Ricardo was a computer technician in a small inland town called Sun Valley. He fixed computers, cell phones, printers, anything that had a button and a screen. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, he had nothing extraordinary about him, but he had one characteristic that everyone noticed. He never said no. Sun Valley was one of those towns where everyone knows everyone. Quiet streets, tree-lined squares, bakeries that open at 5 in the morning and close when the last customer leaves. Ricardo lived alone in a small apartment near the central square. Every day he woke up early, had his coffee with toasted bread, and walked to his workshop, a simple little shop with a blue sign hanging on the door. Ricardo Computer Repair, General Services. It was a quiet life. Predictable, safe, but also empty. Ricardo had always been that guy. You know, the guy everyone looks for when they need something. A neighbor would knock on his door at 8 at night. "Ricardo, my laptop won't turn on. Can you take a look?" And he would look. Right then. Without charging. The bakery owner would call on Sunday. "Ricardinho, the printer jammed again. Can you come over real quick?" And he would go. On Sunday. Without complaining, his cousin would call in the middle of the night. "Cousin, I need help. My car broke down on the road. Can you pick me up?" And Ricardo would pick him up. Tired, but always available. In technical support, he let people pay later. Sometimes, that later never came. He worked for free, for the school, for the church, for the health clinic, because after all, it was for a good cause. And meanwhile, his own bills were overdue. His own car needed repair. His own nights of sleep were interrupted. But he smiled. Because helping others was what he knew how to do. The person who noticed all of this was Donna Lourdes, Ricardo's mother. She lived on the other side of town but stopped by the workshop almost every day to bring lunch for her son. And every time, she saw the same scene. Ricardo serving 3 people at once, running from one side to the other, with his cell phone ringing non-stop. One day, she set the lunch container on his desk and said, "My son, don't you get tired?" "I'm fine, Mom," he replied, without taking his eyes off the computer. "You're fine?" she repeated, crossing her arms. "Or are you pretending you're fine?" Ricardo stopped. He took a deep breath. But he didn't answer. Donna Lourdes continued. "Do you know how many times Joe from the bakery called you this week? 5 times. Do you know how many times he paid you? None. And do you know what he did when you asked him to lend you $50 last week? He said he had no money." Ricardo lowered his head. "Mom, he needed it." "And you don't need it?" She cut him off. "My son, kindness is beautiful, but you're not the savior of the world. You also have limits." She kissed his forehead and left, but the words remained. It was on a rainy Thursday that everything collapsed. Ricardo had spent the entire week solving other people's problems. He had fixed computers for free, helped organize the school event, lent money to a friend, and stayed up late helping his neighbor format her phone. That night, exhausted, he finally arrived home. But upon entering, he noticed something. The apartment was cold. The heater had burned out, and he hadn't had time to fix it. He went to the refrigerator. Empty. He hadn't had time to go shopping. He looked at the couch, full of dirty clothes. He hadn't had time to wash them. He grabbed his cell phone to ask for help. He called his cousin. No answer. He called his neighbor. Voicemail. He called Joe from the bakery. Nothing. Ricardo sat on the living room floor with his hands on his face, and for the first time in a long time, he cried. He cried from exhaustion. He cried from loneliness. He cried because he realized something terrible. He was always there for everyone, but no one was there for him. The rain was beating hard against the window. The empty apartment echoed only the sound of Ricardo's heavy breathing. He looked at his own hands, hands that had fixed so many things, except his own life. And in that silence, a question pierced through his mind like a blade. Why do I always choose others and never myself? There was no answer, only emptiness. The next day, Ricardo woke up with no desire to open the workshop, but he went. Because that's what he always did. When he arrived, there were already 3 people waiting at the door. He took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and heard a voice. Looks like you need a break. He turned around. It was Mr. Alberto, a man about 70 years old, retired, who used to pass through the square every morning. Good morning, Mr. Alberto. Ricardo forced a smile. Good morning, nothing. You look like you haven't slept. Come here. Before Ricardo could refuse, Mr. Alberto pulled him to a bench in the square. Sit down, breathe, and listen to me. Ricardo obeyed. Mr. Alberto pointed to a large tree in the middle of the square. Do you see that tree? I do. It's been here for more than 50 years. I've seen many people sit under it. I've seen many people rest in its shade. And do you know what happens when the tree tries to give shade to everyone? All the time, without rest? Ricardo remained silent. It dries up. Mr. Alberto completed. Because even a tree needs water, sunlight, time to take care of itself. He looked into Ricardo's eyes. You're a good person, but you're drying up, my friend. Because you're giving everything and receiving nothing. Mr. Alberto continued. Do you know why the tree doesn't die? Because it has roots. And those roots have limits. They don't go looking for water anywhere. They choose where to grow, where to deepen. He paused. You need roots, Ricardo. You need to learn that saying no is also an act of care, not for others, for yourself. Ricardo swallowed hard. But people need me. Need you? Mr. Alberto smiled. Or have they gotten used to having you always available? Silence. Kindness without limits isn't kindness, my friend. It's self-destruction. Mr. Alberto stood up. I'm going to give you a challenge. For 1 week, you're going to do the following. Every time someone asks you for something, you're going to stop, breathe, and ask yourself, will this harm me? If the answer is yes, you say no. Simple as that. Ricardo's eyes widened. But I can't. Yes, you can. You just need to practice. Mr. Alberto patted him on the shoulder. 1 week. That's all. Then you tell me how it went. And he walked away. On the first day, the neighbor appeared. Ricardo, my laptop. Ricardo took a deep breath. Not today. I have too much work. The neighbor made a sour face and left grumbling. And Ricardo felt guilt. An enormous guilt. Heavy, as if he had committed a crime. He spent the rest of the day thinking, was I rude? Is he angry with me? On the second day, the bakery owner called. Ricardinho, the printer. Donna Maria, I can't today, but I'll stop by tomorrow. But it's really quick. Tomorrow, Donna Maria. He hung up, and the guilt returned. But something strange began to happen. On the third day, Ricardo realized he had time. Time to have lunch calmly, time to organize the workshop, time to go to bed early. On the fourth day, he went shopping. He filled the refrigerator. He washed his clothes. On the fifth day, he fixed the heater. And for the first time in months, He felt like he was taking care of himself. On the sixth day, the real test came. His cousin called. "Cousin, I need you to lend me $1,000. It's urgent." Ricardo stopped. $1,000. He had it, but it was the rent money. "Cousin, I can't this time." "What do you mean you can't? I've always helped you." Ricardo took a deep breath. "When did you help me?" Silence on the other end. "You know what? Whatever." His cousin hung up on him. Ricardo was shaking, but relieved, because for the first time, he had chosen himself. The weeks passed, and something changed in Ricardo. He began to charge for the services he provided, to say no to absurd requests, to prioritize his own health. And do you know what happened? The people who really cared about him stayed around. Donna Lourdes, Mr. Alberto, some true friends. But the people who only looked for him when they needed something disappeared. And Ricardo realized they weren't friends. They were users. One morning, Mr. Alberto stopped by the workshop again. "So, my friend, how was the week?" Ricardo smiled. A genuine smile. "It was liberating." Mr. Alberto nodded. "Did you learn the lesson?" "I did. Saying no isn't selfishness. It's self-respect." "Exactly, Mr." Alberto shook his hand. "Now you understand. You can only give to others what you have. And if you empty yourself out, you'll have nothing left to give." And you? Are you still emptying yourself out? Are you still saying yes when your body is screaming no? Are you still carrying everyone else's weight, except your own? Think about it. How many times have you given up your rest, your peace, your health, to please someone who didn't even call to see how you were doing afterward? How many times have you been the last priority in your own life? Ricardo learned something that will stay with him forever. Saying no is an act of love. Not for others, for yourself. Because kindness without limits isn't virtue. It's self-destruction. And you don't need to destroy yourself to be loved. The right people will respect you. And those who don't respect you were never yours to begin with. So, next time someone asks you for something, stop, breathe, and ask yourself, will this harm me? If the answer is yes, say no, and don't feel guilty, because taking care of yourself isn't selfishness, it's survival. This was Ricardo's story, and it can be yours too. The great power of saying no is the power of saying yes to yourself. Ricardo's transformation wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. There were days when the old guilt crept back in, whispering that he was being selfish, that he was letting people down. But each time he felt that familiar weight pressing on his chest, he remembered Mr. Alberto's words about the tree. He remembered how close he had come to completely drying up, to losing himself entirely in the service of others who never truly valued him. The apartment that had once felt cold and empty began to feel like a home again. Ricardo started cooking proper meals for himself, something he hadn't done in years. He began reading books before bed instead of staying up late fixing someone else's problem. He even adopted a small dog from the local shelter, a scruffy little terrier he named Luck, because that's what finding each other felt like. At the workshop, things changed too. Ricardo put up a sign with his actual business hours and stuck to them. No more emergency calls at midnight. No more free work for people who never intended to pay. He created a proper pricing structure, and, surprisingly, people respected it. Those who truly needed his services paid without complaint. Those who had been taking advantage simply stopped coming, and Ricardo realized their absence didn't hurt at all. In fact, it felt like freedom. Donna Lourdes noticed the change in her son immediately. The dark circles under his eyes faded. The tightness in his shoulders relaxed. Most importantly, when she asked him how he was doing, his answer of, "I'm fine, Mom," was finally true. One afternoon, as they shared coffee in his now tidy apartment, she held his hand and said, I'm proud of you, my son. Not because you learned to say no, but because you learned to say yes to yourself. Mr. Alberto became a regular presence in Ricardo's life, not as someone who needed fixing or helping, but as a genuine friend. They would meet at the square most mornings, watching the sunrise and talking about life, about boundaries, about the wisdom that comes with age and experience. Mr. Alberto shared stories from his own life, times when he too had learned hard lessons about giving too much and receiving too little. You know, Ricardo, Mr. Alberto said one particularly beautiful morning, the most valuable thing any of us has isn't our time, our money, or our skills. It's our energy, our life force. And once you give it away, you can't get it back. You can make more money. You can find more time. But energy? That's finite. That's precious. Learning to protect it isn't selfish. It's essential. Ricardo thought about this often. He thought about all the years he had given away his precious energy to people who treated it as if it were worthless, as if he were an infinite resource that could never run dry. He had been so close to running completely dry, so close to losing himself entirely. The rainy Thursday night when he sat crying on his living room floor had been his rock bottom, but it had also been his awakening. Now, when people asked him for help, he assessed each request carefully. Can I do this without harming myself? Do I have the time and energy? Is this person someone who would help me if our situations were reversed? These weren't cruel questions. They were necessary ones. They were the roots Mr. Alberto had talked about, the boundaries that kept him healthy and whole. Some people called him selfish. His cousins spread rumors around town that Ricardo had changed, that success had gone to his head, that he wasn't the kind, generous person he used to be. But Ricardo knew the truth. He was actually kinder now, because the help he gave came from a place of genuine ability and desire, not from obligation and exhaustion. He was more generous because what he gave wasn't given at the expense of his own well-being. The real friends, the true ones, understood immediately. They celebrated his transformation. They told him they were glad to see him taking care of himself. Some even admitted they had worried about him for years, but hadn't known how to bring it up. We could see you burning out, one friend confessed, but you always insisted you were fine. A year after that rainy Thursday, Ricardo stood in his workshop on another Thursday evening. This time, in sunshine streaming through the clean windows. He looked around at the organized space, at the schedule book with reasonable appointments, at the locked door that wouldn't open for emergencies that weren't his responsibility. He thought about the man he had been a year ago, the exhausted, depleted version of himself who couldn't even keep food in his own refrigerator. That man was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, healthier, and paradoxically, more capable of genuine kindness. Because now when Ricardo helped someone, it came from overflow, not from emptying himself out. He helped because he wanted to, and could, not because he felt guilty or obligated. The difference was profound. Mr. Alberto was right. The tree needed its roots, its boundaries, its limits. Without them, it would simply dry up and die, unable to give shade to anyone. With them, it could stand strong for 50 years, for 100 years, providing shelter and beauty without destroying itself in the process. Ricardo had learned to be like that tree. He had learned that self-preservation wasn't the opposite of generosity. It was the foundation of it. As he locked up the workshop and walked home, luck running excited circles around his feet, Ricardo felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Deep, genuine peace. Not the exhausted collapse that came from giving everything away, but the solid contentment that came from living in balance, from honoring both his desire to help others and his need to help himself. That night, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. Old Ricardo would have answered immediately, ready to solve whatever problem was on the other end. New Ricardo looked at the phone, looked at the comfortable couch where he'd been planning to read his book, looked at Luck curled up beside him, and let it go to voicemail. If it was important, they would leave a message. If it was urgent, they could call emergency services. His evening, his peace, his energy were not available for anyone who asked. The phone stopped ringing. Ricardo picked up his book. Luck sighed contentedly. And in that moment, Ricardo understood the full power of the word he had spent 42 years being afraid to say. No wasn't a rejection of others. It was an acceptance of himself. It wasn't cruelty. It was wisdom. It wasn't the end of his kindness. It was the beginning of his wholeness. The great power of saying no, Ricardo finally understood, wasn't in the rejection itself. It was in what that rejection protected. His health, his time, his energy, his life. Every no to someone else was a yes to himself. And after a lifetime of saying yes to everyone else, it was finally his turn. This is where Ricardo's story brings us back to you. Because somewhere in this story, you've probably recognized yourself. Maybe you're the person who always answers the phone, who always says yes, who always puts everyone else first, who feels guilty for the smallest act of self-preservation. If that's you, then Ricardo's story is your story too, and his lesson can be your lesson. You don't have to wait for a rainy Thursday breakdown. You don't have to hit rock bottom before you learn to set boundaries. You can start today, right now, with one small no, one small choice to put yourself first, one small act of self-love disguised as a simple three-letter word. Because the truth is, the world will keep taking from you as long as you keep giving without limits. People will keep using you as long as you let them. And you will keep emptying yourself out until there's nothing left, unless you learn to say no. So say it, practice it, feel the guilt, and do it anyway. Because that guilt isn't proof that you're doing something wrong. It's proof that you're doing something different, something necessary, something that will ultimately save you. The guilt will fade. The boundaries will become easier. And one day, you'll wake up and realize that saying no has become as natural as saying yes once was. Except this time, you're not sacrificing yourself in the process. The great power of saying no is really the great power of saying yes to yourself, your health, your peace, your life. It's the power to be whole instead of depleted, strong instead of exhausted, genuine instead of resentful. It's the power to help others from a place of overflow instead of obligation. And it's the power to finally put yourself first without apology. This was Ricardo's story, and it can be yours too.